All right, class, let's get started. Chapter 6, how cells release energy. Remember, we talked about every cell in your body requires energy. And so this is understanding that we know that plants can get energy from the sun, combine with water and carbon dioxide, make glucose, which their body can use to make ATP for more energy. And we have to, as human beings, we have to eat to be able to get energy, and we can convert that to the food we eat. We can use that to power the different reactions that our body needs to be able to help us to survive. Organisms need food to survive. Panda eats the bamboo, and tree makes its own food by photosynthesis. Food is used for energy. Molecules in the food, such as glucose, which we saw plants, the part of the end of the carbon reaction. Remember, the end of the carbon reaction, we make glucose. That glucose that the plant makes is energy. It can be used for energy. So molecules in the food, such as glucose, are used to produce ATP through the process of cellular respiration, right? Cellular respiration. Remember, we talked about we just talked about aerobic cellular respiration. How many ATP molecules can we make from one glucose?
Wait. Say that again?
How many ATP can we make from? No, that's from fermentation. That's anaerobic. 36 from aerobic cellular respiration. 36, I believe.
I remember somebody saying 30.
So I think they might have said it, but yeah, it's a lot. But that uses oxygen, and we're going to see the other parts of it in this presentation. In the presence of oxygen, we can convert glucose. We can use the energy and the bonds of the glucose to make 36 adenosine triphosphate ATP, which is energy that the cell can use to then do things like move, build, transport things across the cell, right? Cells cannot survive without ATP. And this is the formula for ATP. You don't have to memorize this formula. I won't ask you to draw it all out, but just know the general idea of ATP. Adenosine, that's the A, triphosphate. Phosphate, 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 right? Aerobic cellular respiration, what we just talked about in the lab, is used by all plants and animals, as well as many microbes. Energy from glucose is extracted, and that energy is put into ATP. So that glucose that the plant makes is then used to form ATP that the cell can then use to power the different reactions. In our bodies, we eat food, carbohydrates, we eat other things. We also eat fats, things like that have your body can convert into glucose, which the cell can then use to make ATP that your cells can use as energy to power different types of reactions inside the cells. Right? Plants and animals both want to make ATP to be able to, as an energy source, to power the reactions in the body. Right? So cells need ATP. ATP is a form of energy the cells are able to use. Think of it as the gasoline of the cell, ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate. Cells use ATP formed during cellular respiration. Glucose used. You take that to the process of cellular respiration, you can make 36 ATP, and it can do work such as active transport, muscle contractions, power different chemical reactions, right? Those are things that the cell needs to do to be able to stay alive, right? So cellular respiration may sound like a big word, but it's not really super complex. Glucose, that's what kind of organic compound is glucose? Carbohydrate. And oxygen, where do you think our bodies get oxygen from? It's happening right now. Inhaling, yes. So you get glucose from the food you eat. You get oxygen from breathing, and inside of your body, you have the reaction and you're able to convert it to CO2. Where does that CO2 go? You breathe out. Water and ATP. This ATP is like I said, the gasoline of the cell. All right? So we eat, we breathe, it makes energy, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. All right? Makes sense. And it's more complex than that, right? There's a whole process. We eat and we breathe. We eat to bring glucose into our bodies. We eat to bring oxygen in. We breathe. The reaction that happens in the cell is carbon dioxide. The reaction that happens in the cell produces carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, H2O, which can be used in other parts of the body, but eventually can exit the body, and ATP, which is the energy that the cell needs. So this is what is required. This is what is produced. And there's a whole electron transport chain, reactions that lead from this to this, but that's the general idea of why you need to breathe, why you need to eat, so that you can stay alive. All right? Hopefully that makes sense. So you drink, you breathe in oxygen, you eat food, you create energy that your body can use. Cellular respiration. All right, so the overall reaction is that glucose and oxygen produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. Carbon dioxide, you breathe out. Water can be used in other parts of the body. ATP, energy to power reactions, transport, move things in and out of the cell, cause the cell to change shape, all kinds of things, produce things, give the energy for the cell to be able to make things. All of this happens with ATP, right? Absolutely necessary. You have to have food, you have to have oxygen to be able to function. All right? Everybody, I'm sure, knows that, but maybe you didn't know why, right? You can't, they say you can live something like a week or two without food, but your body has stored up food in your body, stored up energy in your body in the form of like fat, and then but you can't go very long without oxygen. You can't go very long without oxygen. You absolutely need oxygen, right? I think they said you can only go, I think the world record is like 8 minutes. I don't know, something crazy. So anyways, why do we breathe? We inhale oxygen from the air. We need it for aerobic cellular respiration. We've already talked about that. That's why we breathe. The oxygen comes from the air we breathe. We breathe in oxygen, right? You need that. All right, so cellular respiration occurs in stages, right? Just like photosynthesis occurs in stages, cellular respiration occurs in stages, right? So cellular respiration releases energy from glucose in a series of small steps. So we start off with glucose. We need oxygen. We eventually produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, right? So we know the beginning and we know the end, but like I said, there's a whole bunch of little steps in between to get from the food we eat, the air we breathe, to the ATP the cells need for energy, okay? That whole process is called cellular respiration. All right, so we take these small steps, make cellular respiration more efficient and reduce energy lost as heat. So we have a bunch of steps, as you can see here. Start off with glucose, pyruvate, acetyl-CoA, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, and we make a bunch of ATP. I think it was 38. I think the number is 38. I don't know why. Maybe I got confused in my mind. All right, so glycolysis, the first step, when you see the term lysis, that means to split. To lyse something means to break it up. So glycolysis means splitting of glucose. So we take glucose, a 6-carbon sugar. It's actually a chain, a 6-carbon sugar chain, but they just have it in a line here to make it simpler to look at. You take one molecule of glucose and split it into 2 3-carbon molecules of pyruvate. These reactions release 2 molecules of ATP, so 2 ATP in step 1. Transition, step 2. Pyruvate is converted into 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA. This transition, step 2. This releases carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, you breathe out. It's carbon dioxide released right here as you break down, as you go from pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. Inside the mitochondria, where do we find mitochondria in the body? Mitochondria. What is mitochondria? Where do we find mitochondria? Mitochondria. Mitochondria. Huh? In the cell. It's an organelle inside of your cells, a membrane-bound organelle inside of your cell. That's where we find mitochondria. All right, so those acetyl-CoA molecules are disassembled during the Krebs cycle inside your mitochondria. Energy from that is transferred to electrons. All right, this reaction releases another 2 molecules of carbon dioxide. So more carbon dioxide being released. All right, see that right here, carbon dioxide. Breathe out, carbon dioxide. Electrons are unloaded into an electron transport chain where the potential energy in the electrons is used to produce more ATP. And this requires oxygen and releases water. So it requires oxygen. You breathe in oxygen, requires oxygen, and releases water. All right, so where does cellular respiration take place? In the mitochondria. Glycolysis reactions occur in the cytosol. So what's the cytosol? Anybody remember what that is? Cytosol? Where's cytosol? Miss Pagan. You don't remember what this cytosol is? Oh, we talked about this.
Hold on.
Have you been watching my videos?
No, I have to, I'm going to start.
Okay, you're going to start. Okay. But you've been reading the chapters. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cytosol. Inside the plasma membrane, that fluid inside the plasma membrane is called the cytosol. Inside the cytosol is where all the different organelles of the cell are located. So glycolysis, the splitting of glucose, occurs in the cytosol. The rest of the reactions of cellular respiration happen in the mitochondria. For prokaryotic cells, Krebs cycle occurs in the cytosol and the electron transport chain in the cell membrane of prokaryotic cells. Remember, prokaryotes are a little bit different than eukaryotes.
The only difference is the nucleus, right?
Membrane-bound organelles don't have membrane-bound organelles. Mitochondria is a membrane-bound organelle.
You said they don't have.
Prokaryotes don't have membrane-bound organelles. So that's why their Krebs cycle occurs in the cytosol and electron transport chain in the cell membrane.
Is that a shorter version of saying it doesn't have a nucleus?
Huh? No, it's not. What were we saying?
Sorry, you said the cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria and glycolysis in the cytosol?
In the eukaryotes, yes. Glycolysis in the cytosol of the cells. Yeah, and the rest of the cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. Mm-hmm. What were we saying? Okay. Electron transport chain takes place in the mitochondria. Mitochondria have 2 phospholipid bilayers. Where have we seen phospholipid bilayers? Where have we seen that? Cell membrane, yes. Phospholipid bilayers. Also in the membranes around the different organelles that are in the cells. We see phospholipid bilayers. All right, so mitochondria have phospholipid bilayers, outer membrane, and also have an inner membrane. Many enzymes are embedded in the inner membrane, catalyzing the reactions of the electron transport chain. Between the mitochondrial membranes is an intermembrane compartment. The space in there is called the mitochondrial matrix, which houses the enzymes of the Krebs cycle. All this is happening in the mitochondria. So glycolysis occurs outside in the cytosol, inside the cell, but outside of the mitochondria. Huh?
cell. I said I thought it was in the cell.
It's in the cell, but outside of the mitochondria. Remember, so let me do a drawing. So we have a cell, and then we have this mitochondria in the cell. So glycolysis, which is the breaking apart of glucose into pyruvate, happens here in the cell, inside the cell, but outside of the mitochondria. And then the rest of cellular respiration, breaking down that glucose and eventually making all the ATP, happens inside the mitochondria. Okay? It's just telling you the location of the different reactions. That's all. All right? That's all. Glycolysis requires an input of, this is where the confusion was. Glycolysis requires an input of 2 ATP. So yes, it produces 38, but it takes 2 ATP to do so. So the net result is 36. That's where that confusion was.
Wait, say that again?
So over the process of cellular respiration, from one molecule of glucose, we can make 36 molecules of ATP, adenosine triphosphate.
Okay.
Well, we technically make 38, but we use 2 ATP in the process, and so we have a net result of 36.
Okay.
All right? Requires the input of 2 ATP to activate the glucose. Activated glucose is then converted into the 3 carbon intermediates. So eventually the pyruvate. You're not leaving, are you? Oh, yeah. I was joking. But. All right, you don't need to know this whole equation. Just know that we get from the oh no, what? I need somebody to manage the phone. What happened? Oh, sorry. Okay. I don't know what happened. All right. Yeah, it's still recording. That's weird. I don't know why that happened, but hold on. See, this is why you come to class, so you can see the whole thing. Don't get to. All right.
Would it cut off or something?
It changed position, but it was still recording for whatever reason. I don't know why it did that. You know, technology. It's maybe because I walked over there and it couldn't see me anymore. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know.
I'm so stuck on this flight.
What are you stuck on? Just know that we get from the glucose to the pyruvates in the first step of in glycolysis. So
It's the breakdown of glucose.
breakdown of glucose, breaking it into two. So glucose is a 6-carbon sugar, and eventually what we get to is 2 3-carbon sugars, 1, 2, 3 carbon sugars. And in that process, it's phosphate groups to ADP molecules producing ATP. In that process, each one produces an ATP. So we get our first 2 ATP produced. So glycolysis, ATP is produced from ADP. What does ADP mean? Does anybody know? I don't know what's going on. I might just have, don't worry about it. I'm just gonna, you know what? Maybe it's out of power or something. I don't know. It's like still recording though. It's just it's the bass. All right. Anyways, let's cut that off. It doesn't have to be, but it just holds it at a nice angle. I was gonna see if we can just do it like this. Oh, that'll work. All right, we'll just hold it. We'll just do it like that. All right. All right, so ADP, adenosine diphosphate, ATP adenosine triphosphate. When we energize it, when we add energy to it, we go from ADP to ATP. So we add one more phosphate group to the ADP. So ADP has two phosphate groups. When we add the energy to it from the reaction, we can add another phosphate group. This last connection has a lot of energy between this bond. That energy can then be used to power other reactions that the cell needs in the future. So we're creating, like I said, the energy that the cell can use. So glycolysis has a net of 2 ATP produced. So in total, 4 ATP were made from just the glycolysis portion, but we use 2 ATP in the process, so the net yield is 2, right? So in this whole process. Glycolysis is anaerobic. What does anaerobic mean? We just talked about that, yes, but you may not have thought that was important. Anaerobic, what does anaerobic mean? Anaerobic. Anaerobic means it does not require oxygen. Aerobic, when you do aerobics, like if somebody said I'm going to an aerobic class, what we generally mean is something that was going to get your heart rate up and you're going to be breathing a lot. Anaerobic is generally when something is anaerobic means it operates without the presence of oxygen, right? So the glycolysis reaction, the splitting of glucose into pyruvate, which you have at the end, and the making of the first 2 ATP. We actually made 4, but net result of 2 is anaerobic. All right, so that's the summary of glycolysis, right? Like I said, you don't need to know the whole reaction. I'm not going to ask you to list all these out. Just know
This gonna be on our midterm too?
What?
This not gonna be on our midterm, right?
I say you don't need to list it all out.
No, it's asking chapter 6.
Chapter 6, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Study hard, baby. Study hard. Glucose, pyruvate. You can do it. You can do it. Click a question. Don't need that. All right. So then we get to aerobic respiration. Aerobic means?
Without oxygen.
Anaerobic means without. Aerobic means it requires oxygen. So the reactions of the Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, require oxygen gas. All right. So now we need oxygen to be able to make all the rest of these ATP. So we can make some ATP without the presence of oxygen, but very little. You would not be able to survive just off of the ATP made by glycolysis, right? We cannot survive in an environment without oxygen. We can make a little bit of energy, but we can't make a whole bunch. So we absolutely need oxygen to survive, to be able to make this 36 grand total of ATP from one molecule of glucose. We need oxygen. That's why you breathe all day, every day. All right, so we have this transition step, the 2 pyruvates from the glucose that have been split through the process of glycolysis undergo an oxidation reaction as they enter the mitochondria. All right. Carbon atom is stripped from each pyruvate and leaves the cell as a carbon dioxide molecule. At the same time, NAD is reduced to NADH. Reduced means we add electrons to it. Remember, electrons have a negative charge. So if we're reducing something, we're adding electrons to it, therefore reducing the charge because electrons have a negative charge. So it has a positive charge. We add the hydrogen to it, the electrons, we reduce it. All right, so we bring down the charge to it. We reduce the charge of it. All right, so we added electrons to it. If oxygen is available, which it is if you're breathing, of course, acetyl-CoA enters the Krebs cycle so that more energy can be extracted from it. Right? So this is going to enter what is called the Krebs cycle, and we can extract more energy, make more ATP. Right, so during the Krebs cycle, the two acetyl-CoA molecules are oxidized, removing electrons, oxidized, yielding 4 CO2. What's CO2? Carbon dioxide. 2 ATP, energy, 6 NADH, and 2 FADH2. Right, we're going to see what those are. So this is what we're inputting. This is from the pyruvate, which has been reduced, 2 ADP, adenosine diphosphate, plus phosphate groups, NAD plus, FAD, and then we have these hydrogen ions that we're adding, right? The output is going to be carbon dioxide, which you breathe out, ATP, energy, and then we have these two molecules here, which are going to be further used to create more energy. All right, so that's the Krebs cycle, and that's what's happening there. Like I said, you don't need to know the whole. You don't need to know the whole process.
Like what are you
But you need
talking about?
you need to understand that this process happens, and that we go from glucose to pyruvate to acetyl-CoA through this process called the Krebs cycle, and we produce 2 more ATP and we produce some carbon dioxide. Okay? So you don't, like I said, I won't ask you to redo this whole chain, but just read through it and see this process, see the process that is happening here, and that we get to make 2 more ATP. The NADH and the FADH2 are going to carry electrons and carry energy into the next part of the process. All right, so how much ATP is produced so far? Glycolysis. We used up 2, but we made 4, so we made 2 ATP. We have this transition step where we get to the acetyl-CoA from the pyruvate, and then we have this Krebs cycle, which makes 2 more ATP, carbon dioxide, which is going to be a waste, and then NADH and FADH2. All right, so far, aerobic respiration of 1 glucose molecule has yielded only 4 ATP. Still not enough for our bodies to be able to survive. We need more. We need more. All right? But we have 10 NADH molecules. Energy has been transferred. Energy has been transferred, as well as 2 FADH2 molecules. And they're going to carry more electrons, which means carry energy into this electron transport chain, which is going to help us make more ATP. So these NADH, the FADH2, donate their electrons to the electron transport chain inside the mitochondria, inside your cell, where energy from the electrons is used to produce many ATP. Like I said, I won't ask you the whole formula. Just know that this happens as electrons travel through this transport chain. Remember, electrons are bound to different molecules. When you break that connection, you release energy. And you're transferring that electron. Every time you transfer that electron, you're releasing energy. That energy is harnessed by the mitochondria to make ATP. All right, so as the electrons travel through the transport chain, carrier molecules use that potential energy of the electrons. So electrons, this NADH, I break that bond between these electrons and transport it, and the energy of the electrons to transport hydrogen ions into the intermembrane compartment. Use that energy. They move down their concentration gradient into the matrix, pass through an enzyme called ATP synthase. The ATP synthase produces ATP. So I'm breaking the bonds of the electrons with the different molecules, and as I move those electrons, I'm using the energy that I'm harnessing from that to make ATP. And this is all in the mitochondria. In the mitochondria, in the presence of oxygen. Aerobic respiration, aerobic cellular respiration. Yes.
So mitochondria. So I see that's phospholipid bilayer.
This is inside the mitochondria.
That's inside.
Yeah, this is inside the mitochondria. Yes. Yeah, and intermembrane compartment. So this is the outer membrane of the mitochondria. This is like the inner. These are called the cristae of the mitochondria. This is the inner membranes of the mitochondria. Where,
Nitrogen was being broken down in this.
yes, NADH. That H is the hydrogen. That's what we're releasing, breaking that bond, which is a part of the electron transport chain, and transferring it and transferring that energy of that broken bond.
And then this is it going out of.
This is that NADH transporting that electron through these different enzymes in the inner membranes. What you need, huh?
Like down here, like what's going on down here? Is it coming out of the membrane?
This down here?
Still inside. Yeah.
This is all inside the mitochondria. Yeah, this is all still inside the mitochondria. Yes.
So the whole thing, aerobic cellular respiration, except for glycolysis, is all require oxygen.
Except for glycolysis, yes.
Even the transition step and the curve, like both of them.
Yeah, so after, hold on, somebody's at the door. Sorry. No problem. So yeah, after you get past glycolysis, then the rest of it requires oxygen. Yes.
Cell membrane has phospholipid layers, right?
Phospholipid bilayer, cell membrane does, yes. And the membrane of the mitochondria also has a phospholipid bilayer.
So those two have phospholipid layers.
Well, all the membranes, all your organelles have membranes that have phospholipid bilayers. That's what distinguishes us as eukaryotes. One of the things that distinguishes us as eukaryotes. All right? This electron transport chain, this removing of the electrons, the hydrogens from the NADs and the FADs and passing that, harnessing that energy when we break those bonds, produces 34 ATP, right? So we were up to 4, and now we have 34. So that's 38 minus the 2 that we use is 36, right? That is how we stay alive. At the end of the transport chain, electrons are donated to an oxygen atom and combined with hydrogen to form water. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor. Without it, the chain shuts down. Right? So we need oxygen to finally accept that electron, the electrons that we have transported down this electron transport chain, and then that makes water. Huh? All right, so we get a total of 36 ATP in that whole process. Glycolysis can happen without oxygen. Krebs cycle needs oxygen. 2 ATP. Electron transport chain needs oxygen. 34 ATP. 34 plus 2, 36 total. All right? Just need to understand this basic concept. Well, it's not basic, but understand this concept. So this is happening in the cytosol, inside the cell, but outside the mitochondria. Then we enter into the mitochondria. The rest of this is happening inside the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen. And the result is 36 ATP. And this is how we get from glucose that we eat, oxygen that we breathe, to 36 ATP that the cell can use to power the different types of reactions or whatever the cell needs to do. Move, chemical reactions, transport things into and out of the cell that require energy. It can use that ATP to do all those things. Right? Makes sense, right? Well, hopefully it makes sense. Question? All right, so other carbohydrates can enter the energy extracting pathways, right? So most of the food you eat is not pure glucose, right? So how do we get to glucose that your body can use in the glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, blah, 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 blah. So most of the food we eat is actually polysaccharides. What is a polysaccharide? Huh? Yeah, 3 or more. So 3 or more, generally. So such as glycogen, starch, right? Chains of monosaccharides make up what is called polysaccharides. So most of the food we eat are going to be polysaccharides, so chains of glucose, multiple chains. We have to break those down into and eventually get to glucose that our cells can use, right? Does anybody know how that happens? How we get from the food we eat to glucose. How do we get to, huh? Well, glucose is a monosaccharide that our bodies can use.
Maybe.
How do we get from poly to mono?
Maybe it like breaks down.
What process happens in the body every time you eat something? Digestion. Yes. All right. Proteins and fats are also used as energy sources. Components of fats can be converted to pyruvate or acetyl-CoA. Amino acids from proteins can be converted to pyruvate, also acetyl-CoA or Krebs cycle. All right, so these things can be, we eat proteins, we eat starch, glycogen, polysaccharides, we eat fats. They can all be broken down, digested, broken down into glucose or pyruvate and then enter cellular respiration. Okay? Cellular respiration is not always aerobic. There is some anaerobic aspects to it. So many organisms can survive in the absence of oxygen. We just talked about plants, for instance. Glycolysis produces ATP without requiring oxygen. Remember, we can get 2 ATP from glycolysis. Glycolysis requires NAD plus to pick up electrons. Anaerobic cellular respiration, NADH gives up its electrons in the electron transport chain, but it requires oxygen. So what happens in anaerobic? So aerobic, in the presence of oxygen, we have that electron transport chain. At the end of that chain is oxygen. Oxygen is the final receptor of the electrons, produces water. We make 36 ATP. But what happens if we are in anaerobic? Well, cells have an alternative pathway. So in the absence of oxygen, a cell can recreate that NAD in other pathways called anaerobic respiration and fermentation. Fermentation we talked about today in the lab. Right, so glucose, split, get your NADH, 2 ATP. What happens to the NADH produced in glycolysis? Electrons are donated to electron transport chain. What is a terminal electron acceptor? In aerobic respiration, a terminal electron acceptor is oxygen. In anaerobic respiration, you have an inorganic acceptor other than oxygen that can accept some of the electrons. In fermentation, electrons from the NADH reduce pyruvate and O2 is not required, right? So for fermentation, you don't need oxygen at all. So in anaerobic respiration, produces ATP during the electron transport chain. Many prokaryotes use anaerobic respiration. Prokaryotes. Remember, they don't require oxygen. So they have a Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, but they have a different acceptor at the end. All right, so different electron acceptors allow for less ATP production. Right? With oxygen, we're able to produce more ATP, but without oxygen, you can still produce some ATP, as in plants. Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I missed it. CTC.
Electron transport chain. Yep. Many prokaryotes and some eukaryotes use fermentation. There's no Krebs cycle or electron transport chain, and fermentation simply allows glycolysis to continue breaking apart glucose, and you can produce smaller amounts of ATP. Okay? So no oxygen needed, no electron transport chain needed, just simply breaking apart glucose and by the process of glycolysis, and you can produce small amounts, see very little amounts of ATP. Okay. Fermentation, yes.
Sorry,
Yes,
when
yes,
you say
yes.
small amounts of ATP, is that still going to be 2? Or just...
That's how much we can get from, in general, I mean, but depending on their process, I mean, it can be different in different prokaryotes. Yeah, it depends on their process. It's definitely going to be less than you would in the presence of oxygen. Fermentation uses pyruvate to oxidize NADH and regenerate NAD, and is converted into alcohol, lactic acid, other byproducts. Right? Microbes can carry out alcoholic fermentation. This is very popular, and the substance known as beer. Alcoholic fermentation, NADH reduces pyruvate to ethanol, and NAD plus is recreated. All right, so that's a formula that people have mastered, taking glucose, some type of sugar, putting it through the process of fermentation and producing ethanol, alcohol, to make something that people actually enjoy drinking. And then there's lactic acid fermentation. This actually happens in your bodies. If you lift weights, sometimes your body can have anaerobic respiration, anaerobic cellular respiration, and produce lactic acid as it splits the glucose and into pyruvate and produces ATP, and it has as a byproduct lactic acid, and you can have lactic acid build up in your muscles. All right. Bacteria and muscle cells both carry out lactic acid fermentation. Fermentation generates ATP only in glycolysis. So during fermentation, only some of the energy from glucose is extracted, and so it yields 2 ATP. Now, some of these, obviously with human beings, we can go through this process of glycolysis and yield some ATP that way, but we continue to yield more ATP through other means, through aerobic cellular respiration. All right, that's that question there. You can go over that later. Photosynthesis and respiration are related. We talked about photosynthesis last week, but they're very related. All right. Why do we need photosynthesis as human beings? Why do we need photosynthesis? Yes.
Carbon dioxide.
Okay. Yeah. Well, oxygen.
Oh, oxygen, yes.
Oxygen, because we need oxygen. So we need photosynthesis because we need the plants to produce oxygen, but there's another reason we need photosynthesis to happen. Not just so they can produce oxygen, but so they can produce something else. Food. Yeah, we eat the plants that grow by photosynthesis, right? And so they produce all types of carbohydrates and vitamins and minerals and things like that, and we eat it. So we need photosynthesis. We need those plants to grow. So we need photosynthesis to happen so that we can eat the food. Anybody have kale or eat kale or broccoli or, yeah, okay, all those good things. Yeah, spinach, asparagus, eat your vegetables, fruits and veggies. No, it's serious. It's good for you. Oranges, apples, all those things are good for you. Right? They're not lying when the doctor said that. All right, so we need all those things to happen. All right, so food. Photosynthesis, they become food that we can consume. All right? For photosynthesis, light is required, water is required, carbon dioxide is consumed, oxygen is released. Respiration, we consume food, energy is released from glucose and other food molecules. We can eat in pure darkness and be just fine. Humans can operate in darkness because we don't need, well, it's good to have light for some other reasons, but as far as like you can survive in darkness, your body can produce all the energy it needs in darkness. All right? That's the end. Any questions? All right, you're free to go.